Welcome back to our podcast, Regulation Matters, a Clear Conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Line Dempsey. I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer with Riccoboni Associates Family Dentistry with practices in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I've also been a board member and I am a past president of CLEAR. Now, as many of you are aware, the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation, or CLEAR, is an association of individuals, agencies, and organizations that comprise the international community of professional and occupational regulation. This podcast is an opportunity for you to hear about important topics in our regulatory community. The topic of this episode of Regulation Matters is a focus on consumers. CLEAR's 2024 Annual Education Conference in Baltimore included a presentation about practical and successful approaches to consumer engagement and regulation. This episode follows up on that presentation through a conversation with Stuart Wilkinson, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario's Chief Consumer Officer, about how his organization tries to listen to consumers. Stuart, we're glad to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited for the conversation.
Excellent. Well, can you kind of set the stage of our conversation today by kind of letting know what does the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario do? And that's FSRA, right?
That is FSRA. Thanks very much, Line. FSRA is a financial services regulator in the Canadian province of Ontario. We regulate a lot of different financial services sectors. So we oversee pension plans, mortgage brokers, credit unions, and insurance companies. Those are our big four sectors. So we're not responsible for all financial services, but we are responsible for a big chunk of them. And those sectors are very different, but what brings them all together is they all serve consumers at really important times in their lives or are fundamental to their daily lives. So you need a pension to retire. Mortgage brokers help fulfill your dream of home ownership. Insurance is there when you have a loss and need to make a claim. Credit unions are there to provide daily financial services to you. So these are entities that are really important to Ontarians in their daily lives and at important times in their lives. And they're really big regulated sectors as well. For example, the pension plans that we oversee hold over $800 billion in assets and serve, I think it's 4.6 million pension plan members in Ontario. The mortgage brokers that we oversee arranged over $200 billion in mortgages last year. So they're having a big impact, big positive impact for Ontarians, and we're here to protect the public interest, hold them to high standards of business conduct, and promote public confidence in the sectors that we regulate.
Well, excellent. Well, I guess why did FSRA kind of create a consumer office? I mean, it kind of sounds like some of the protection of those things that you just mentioned, but what was the vision?
Yeah, it's a great question because you could say that we're all a consumer office at FSRA. Our vision is financial safety, fairness, and choice for Ontarians. Everybody in this building is here to protect consumers at the end of the day. The reason why FSRA has a unit called the Consumer Office is because we're really focused on amplifying the voice of consumers. We find that as a regulator, we get pretty busy day to day. There's lots of stuff to do. We're collaborating with regulated entities. We're developing guidance, making rules, going out and doing supervisory examinations, taking complaints, taking inquiries. There are lots of day-to-day operational things. And one thing we're worried about is losing sight of the people that we're here to protect. And the consumer office exists to correct for that risk, to make sure that FSRA is taking some of its resources and dedicating it to listening to consumers and helping us build pathways into the public interest community so we can hear the public interest perspective on the work that we're doing. And I think it's important because both as a regulator, we've got a lot of other priorities and things to do. So we want to correct for potentially losing sight of the consumer perspective. But we also want to correct for the asymmetry that exists between consumers and the industries that we regulate. Consumers have a lot on their minds. We've done surveys in the past, and most consumers spend more time thinking about their favorite TV show than they do about their mortgage. And that's like completely understandable. I feel the same way. But that means that even if we post something on our website, we're not sure that a bunch of consumers are going to take a look at it and give us their feedback. So we want to go one step further and meet consumers where they are, to really make sure that we're getting meaningful consumer-focused input to inform our work. So that's the consumer office exists to amplify the voice of the consumer, like turn up the volume to make sure we're hearing it amongst all the other things that we're hearing as a regulator.
That's a good point that you just brought up. So like if I'm just, you're talking billions and billions of dollars in mortgages, in pensions. I'm just one small part of that. How does my voice get heard, right? Like, so how does the consumer office amplify those voices of those consumers like that?
Yeah, we've got kind of two main ways we do it. The consumer office team spends most of its time either on consumer research or supporting something we established called a consumer advisory panel. And in your example, when you're a person with a pension plan or looking to work with a mortgage broker, you've got lots of other things to be taken care of in your life. You may not have even heard that FSRA exists. And like, again, that's completely reasonable. So how are we going to know what your experience is like with our regulated sectors if you don't even know who we are, or even how to reach us? So our consumer research tries to correct for that by getting us consumer experience data without requiring consumers to come to us to talk to us about their experiences. So we do surveys of the Ontario population and ask them questions like, how confident are you dealing with your mortgage broker or your insurance agent? Did you run into any issues? If you did run into issues, what were those? So we're not requiring people to take the couple steps and have the knowledge to come to us and put their experience forward to us. We're going out and asking them. And that's how we get evidence, real data, that can inform our regulatory and supervisory work, because it's telling us how consumers are actually feeling and experiencing our regulated sectors. So that's one way we amplify the voice of the consumer, because we can take that evidence and plug it into our planning and prioritization process, just like we take submissions from stakeholders and regulated entities into account in our planning and prioritization process. The other way is we formed what we call a consumer advisory panel. And these are, we populate that advisory panel based off a public call for members. So we put it out there every year that FSRA is looking for members of its consumer advisory panel. We get some applications in, we review the applications, and then we pick a few folks to fill the spots that we have on the panel. Typically, we have about 13 members on the panel. And these are people that know FSRA exists, and they're people that are passionate about consumer protection and consumer advocacy, and interested in helping shape FSRA's future direction. So they're kind of like a super focus group, or some sort of reference panel that we're able to go to and talk to about FSRA's strategic direction, or maybe they form a particular working group to talk about a specific topic that they're interested in, or a piece of guidance that FSRA is working on. But we can go to them routinely and get advice from a consumer perspective that's outside of FSRA. And FSRA has stakeholder advisory committees that represent the interests of our regulated sectors and foster collaboration and engagement between FSRA and industry stakeholders. And so just like we have those groups, we have a consumer advisory panel to do the same for consumers. So by having the consumer research aspect and the consumer advisory panel aspect, we're kind of going in two different directions to amplify the voice of the consumers. And in one way, we're getting perspectives from folks that the average Ontarian that may not even know that FSRA exists. And then on the other hand, we're getting perspectives from really consumers with deep experience and deep understanding of the sectors that we regulate that want to participate in a really, really meaningful and detailed way in FSRA's work.
I can't help but think that some of these consumer engagement activities that you're talking about right there through those two groups would have to lead to some type of changes with FSRA. Like, can you maybe expound on what has happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you maybe I'll try to avoid us being here all day and tell you three quick stories about how this type of work has impacted FSRA's operations.
Awesome.
The first would be I hope that's an awesome for not being here all day. So the first story is related to that consumer survey research that I mentioned. So we did our first survey in 2022, which is now like 3 years ago. And we took a look at the survey results. And one thing that we found was that there was a significant gap between consumers with a vulnerable profile versus consumers with a normative profile. So vulnerable consumers across the board, no matter what sector you looked at, were more likely to be less trusting, less confident, less satisfied with the sector or the regulated entity that they were working with. So we saw that, and I think there's a potential to say, okay, that's interesting, but let's move on. We've got a bunch of other things to do. And instead, what we did was we actually took that finding and plugged it into FSRA's planning and prioritization process and prioritized finding ways to strengthen protection of vulnerable consumers. And we ran a consultation on that publicly and eventually came out with a vulnerability framework that offers a FSRA's definition of vulnerable consumers, a segmentation tool that FSRA and others can use to identify and help measure outcomes for vulnerable consumers, and some commitments to actions that FSRA will take to strengthen protection of vulnerable consumers. And that's all flowing out of the evidence we gathered that showed gaps in experiences between vulnerable consumers and others. So that's a really important, tangible way in which the work has influenced FSRA's operations. Another one that I think is more personal is how we interact with the public interest community. So I mentioned that we have this consumer advisory panel that's populated through public calls for membership applications. Every year we get a bunch of people coming to FSRA, putting their hands up to join the consumer advisory panel. And we have limited slots that we can plug people into. We can't have a panel of 100 people meeting with FSRA all the time. It wouldn't be logistically possible. So we have a pool of candidates that we call our near miss candidates, or the folks that had really strong applications that we want to keep in touch with, that we couldn't quite find a spot for the panel. And in the past, we've reached out to those people and said we'd love to keep in touch. And sometimes I have a great discussion with them and pass on their feedback, and we leave it at that. But other times we're able to build a strong relationship with these folks, and they end up contributing to FSRA in other ways. We've seen people that applied to our consumer advisory panel become members of other technical advisory committees at FSRA, and we've even seen people that applied for the consumer advisory panel ending up getting hired into FSRA because they were so interested in our work, and we were able to find an opportunity that fit for them. So there's a personal relationship aspect to this work. And because we have a consumer office that's out there amplifying the voice of consumers, we're able to build those relationships and then leverage them to deliver on our mandate more effectively. So we've got the consumer research and influencing our overall planning and prioritization. We've got the personal networking side of it. And the last story is taking the research that we've done and putting it into action in our supervision. I mentioned we regulate mortgage brokers in Ontario. If you Google FSRA, FSRA mortgage broker supervision plan, you'll come to our latest plan for how we're going to supervise that sector. And in that plan, you're going to see references to our consumer research. So we've actually created a process now where we're integrating the findings from our consumer experience research into our organization's supervision planning to make sure that what we find about consumer experiences is actually impacting how FSRA is going about and supervising the sectors, what risks we're concerned about, what we're talking about with the folks that we do examinations with, all of that on the ground stuff that is core to being an effective regulator. So those are the three, but like you said, we wouldn't be here if we weren't impacting FSRA's operations. We're not here to do interesting stuff. We're here to create insights that actually can be applied to FSRA's work.
That's great. Well, you just mentioned, I think, risks, right? And like, so are there common risks or objections that you hear, regularly about consumer engagement?
Yeah, and as soon as we confirmed that we were going to speak today, I actually went back and looked at a presentation that Lucy Becker, Laura Tamblin-Watts, and Judy Pfeiffer made at CLEAR's annual education conference in Baltimore last September 2024. So I feel like I cheated a bit because I'm ready on this question. Lucy, Laura, and Judy spoke about common objections. And they talked about things like hearing that consumers aren't interested. Consumers don't know that we exist. We don't have a budget for that. Our geography is too big. Our scope is too big. So those are common objections. And I would add to that list, not only we don't have a budget, but we don't have the time. We need to get something done right away. We need to get something done quickly. We don't have the time to broaden our consultation or engage with the public in a meaningful way. And I'd say to all those risks and objections that it's important for regulators to go back to like the reason why they exist. What problem are we trying to solve? And ultimately, we're here to protect the public interest. And it's critically important for our own credibility and for the effectiveness of the work that we do that we're listening to the public and understanding how our work impacts them, if it's impacting them, how we're perceived, if they're aware of us. I think all of that is fundamental to our work as regulators. So we hear legitimate objections or reasonable objections to investing in the space, but I really would encourage folks that are thinking about this type of work but not quite convinced to go back to first principles and think about why their organization exists and how are they going to know that they're solving the problems that the organization was created to address. And talking to the public, talking to consumers, engaging with them in a meaningful way has to be part of that equation.
Well, that's that's interesting. So I think what does the future hold, I guess, for this office, right? The consumer office at FSRA?
Lots of fun stuff. That's I really am privileged to be on this team, and we're always trying to do new things to help FSRA listen to consumers better, and ultimately fulfill its mandate more effectively. We've been at this long enough that we've built a few steady programs that we're going to keep delivering on. I mentioned survey research. I mentioned our consumer advisory panel. Those are things that, without question, we're going to keep doing in the future. We also want to add to our toolbox for listening to consumers and try to identify new ways of getting information about consumer experiences that we can feed into FSRA's decision-making processes. So that's something we're going to be emphasizing in our next fiscal year, is trying to develop a plan for supplementing the research that we do with new tools for measuring consumer experiences. We also do a couple things that I haven't mentioned yet that will continue to be important to us in the next fiscal year and beyond. We run a grants program in which FSRA takes funds it collects from proceeds from enforcement actions. Like, we call them administrative penalties. We levy administrative penalties against a regulated entity that's not complied with a certain requirement. And then we take those funds, we put them aside, and the government of Ontario has authorized us to use those funds specifically for consumer research and consumer education purposes. And FSRA has developed a program where we actually put out a public call for applications from the not-for-profit community to use those funds for consumer research. So right now we're funding 4 different projects, all of them focused on financial literacy and education for specific vulnerable populations in Ontario. And we're looking forward to opening the window for another grant application process in the coming months as well. So the grants program is another one of those pillars that we're going to continue working on. And we're also going to continue doing policy work on issues that are affecting consumers across all of FSRA's regulated sectors. So I mentioned our vulnerability framework that we recently released. We're going to keep on looking at that and engaging with stakeholders and consumers on how to apply it going forward. And we're also going to be looking at complaints and how consumer complaints are handled across FSRA's regulated sectors. So there's a whole whack of interesting work for us to do. And as part of that, I hope the future for the Consumer Office holds talking with CLEAR members about our work if they're interested in learning more. We're always delighted to talk with other regulators to learn from them about their practices so that we can get better. And if we have anything to offer other folks to inspire them to engage consumers more, we'd be delighted to do that as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity for us to kind of hear of an example of a successful consumer engagement strategy. So thank you, Stuart, for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Line. This has been really fun. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, and it's just great to get the chance to talk about it with you.
Well, that's great. Well, it's absolutely been a pleasure on our behalf too. And I'd like to, welcome our conversation to continue with our members on the CLEAR Regulatory Network. Now, this podcast episode will be posted there along with some additional questions for our members to consider and discuss. So those questions are, do you think regulators should spend some of their limited resources on listening to consumers? And if no, why not? And if yes, what are some leading practices you'd like to see adopted more widely, or some big ideas that you'd like to see tested? We greatly appreciate and thank our members for the discussion and feedback on that CLEAR Regulatory Network. And if you haven't already, we invite and encourage you to join and take part in these online discussions. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to this episode. We'll be back with another episode of Regulation Matters, a CLEAR conversation, very soon. And if you're new to the CLEAR podcast, please subscribe to us. You can find us on Podbean or any of your favorite podcast services. And if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a rating or comment in the app. Those reviews help us to improve our ranking and make it easier for new listeners to find us. Feel free to also visit our website at www.clearhq.org for additional resources, as well as a calendar of upcoming programs and events. Finally, I'd like to thank our Clear staff, specifically Stephanie Thompson. She is our content coordinator and editor for this program. Once again, I'm Line Dempsey, and I hope to be speaking to you again very soon.